So I happened to see the execution scene from the 1991 movie Let Him Have It, which was about the controversial execution of, God, what was his name now? Derek Bentley, who was hanged for a murder he didn't commit, the murder of a policeman. He was robbing something with a younger accomplice, Christopher Craig, and Craig shot dead the policeman. And Bentley, he'd already been caught by the police, and he shouted, "Let him have it, Chris," which the defence claimed he was saying, like, give the police your gun, give up. And they decided in the court that he meant let him have it was like fire, open fire. So Christopher Craig was too young to hang, so they hanged Bentley for it. And in this movie, he's in his cell and he's praying with the priest, and it strikes 9 o'clock, and they all crash into the cell, the wardens and the hangman, and it's very sort of, on your feet, lad, get up, drink this, and some sort of sedative or alcohol or something's given to him just to keep him quiet for his final moments. And I just thought it was curious because this movie came out around about the same time as the Syd Dernley book, the Hangman's Tale Memoirs, the Hangman's Tale Memoirs of a Public Executioner, which Syd Dernley was the hangman's assistant hangman, assistant executioner, whatever title they give him. Never had the main role, but worked with the likes of Pierpoint, Albert Pierpoint, the legendary or infamous, depending on which side of the fence you stand, British executioner. He hung a lot of the war criminals after the Second World War, the Nazi war criminals, concentration camps, and so on. But Syd Dernley, some change in the law happened around the start of the 90s, and he was no longer under the Secrecy Act, which he was before, and he could tell about all these executions he'd been on. Timothy Evans, he hanged Timothy Evans, and Timothy Evans was later declared that he was innocent. It was actually John Christie who'd murdered his wife and small child, and he was also working with Pierpoint. They did the fastest execution on record, James English, 7 seconds from the time the cell door was opened to getting him on the trap and dropped, as they called it. Because up until this had been released, this book, there was a lot of dark stories, like they thought it was like, as it had been like the 19th century, the gallows were situated quite a walk away from the cell, and the condemned had to be dragged kicking and screaming, and they were plied with alcohol to try and keep them quiet, as was in that movie Let Him Have It. And Syd Dernley basically blew a lot of those myths apart. It was completely set up that it should be as quick and as seamless as possible. The condemned prisoner had no idea he was next door to the gallows. The night before they set the gallows up, they did a test drop with sandbags, tied it to the rope, and the prisoner would be taken for exercise yard or something. So he had no idea it was going on. He couldn't hear it. They'd hear the doors drop all over across the prison, but he had no idea where it was coming from. So they thought, up until the very moment when what they thought was a storeroom next door to their cell, because they'd asked the wardens, there was always wardens in with them, what's through those doors there? And they said, nothing, just a storeroom. There's nothing there. I mean, in their cell, it'd be their cell and a bathroom. They had no idea they're next door to the gallows. So when those doors suddenly opened, the idea was the shock would just overwhelm them. They'd see the rope, the noose, and before they knew what was happening, while they were still trying to process that, the executioner and assistant, it was completely rehearsed. They'd have the guy's hands tied behind his back and be marching him onto the trap door. And as Syd Dernley was on numerous, he details that most of the executions he was on, and there was only once was there any real fear of the one of the prisoners like kicking off and trying to get away from it. The other was just completely overawed. I mean, these were notorious killers, some very unpleasant people, some of them, and but still they were completely overwhelmed by it. And another thing, contrasting with that Let Him Have It movie, is that there was no sedatives, no alcohol, anything given. They went to their deaths completely sober. They pioneered the long drop method. This was when it doesn't feature so much. Well, Dernley mentioned it in his book, but he didn't work on those. I think he started 49. Dernley started working as a hangman's assistant executioner But working with Pierpoint, he heard all the stories from Pierpoint about how he'd flown over to Germany to hang these Nazi war criminals because the Americans were trying to do it, and these nooses were tearing off the condemns and causing terrible damage to the face and that. I mean, some might say they're Nazis, who cares? But Pierpoint was determined to do it cleanly. And the long drop method, they weigh the person, they've taken into account the weight of the person, the height of the person, a mathematical table to determine how far to drop the person. So something like, whatever name was, the Bitch of Belsen, the female concentration camp guards that were hanged would get more of a drop than, say, Rudolf Hess, a bigger man. They'd get a shorter drop, and it separated the spine at a certain point and caused immediate unconsciousness and death very, very soon afterwards. But there was zero suffering involved, and that was the ethos of these. The person had been judged, had been found guilty, whatever they'd done, that had all been dealt with. They were just someone to be dealt with humanely, as quickly as possible, always quick. And that's in Syd Dernley's books, always emphasised, just get them on the trap and get them dropped, get them hanged. Excellent book. I found it about 20 years ago, a copy in a charity shop in England. And if ever there was an argument, or if ever it should be said that a book should be brought back and put into Kindle, it's this one. For anyone with an interest in it's a bit macabre, but still it's highly interesting, and just it's a great account of also life in England at the time, the post-war years. Syd Dernley was a welder. He'd not been called up because mining. Yeah, he was a welder in a mine in Nottinghamshire, so that was a reserved occupation, like being in the police. He didn't have to go. I think he wanted to be a bomber pilot, but he was talked out of that one, and so he was he'd always had an interest in executions and crime and murder, and so he just wrote off a letter saying, I want to be a assistant executioner. He got taken on, and he always declared he used to get these letters telling him where to go to various prisons to hang these people, go the night before, meet up with the other hangman. A couple of times there were double hangings, so there'd be actual two head executioners and two assistants, and then suddenly the letters dried up, and he claims in his book he never knew why and stuff, but it turns out he used to like he liked his rude jokes. I think back in the 50s it was called obscene material, but I think like obscene, like nothing terrible, but for that day and age he was probably just printing out some stuff, and that was pretty risque, but he actually got 6 months in prison for it, and that was pretty much grounds for the authorities to drop him as a hangman or assistant executioner then. So that's when the story comes to an end. But he's quite defiant in his thing that they should, when he's writing it, he died in 94, I think, not long after the book was published, only a couple of years after the book was published, 3 years. And he said, they should bring back capital punishment and stuff. He was quite a hang 'em high type guy. And even the the executions in which the person turned out to be innocent, Timothy Evans, who got a posthumous pardon. He said, the odd expendable person, pretty much, So, whatever anyone personally thinks about that one, but so he's quite bullish about they should bring it back and stuff, which was in marked contrast to someone like Pierpoint, who I think he hanged that woman. What's her name? Ruth something. The last woman to be Ruth Ellis, I think. The last woman to be executed in England, and he actually went to her grave, Pierpoint, and begged for her forgiveness, because that was Ruth Ellis. That was a pretty bad one. She'd been knocked about by this bloke and really treated badly, and I think the French would call it a crime of passion, which would have got her off or got her a prison sentence instead. But it was hanged. HMP Holloway. Yeah, and there was a big fuss about that. I think that's led to the what's the word? The end of the death penalty. I don't know how you say that. Abolition, I think, yeah. So Pierpoint went completely the other way, which has Syd Dernley says in his book is when after you've after you've hanged over 600 people, in most of your career being the head executioner. I think Pierpoint started off, I think his family were in it. He helped his uncle or something, assistant, but most of the time he was head executioner. So when after you've hanged over 600 people, it's a hell of a time to find out that you don't agree with capital punishment. So yeah, up to the day he died, Syd Dernley had no regrets at all, and he said, "I sleep very well, and it doesn't trouble me." But I wish the copy I've got now is just disintegrated. I think I've thrown it away, and it seems quite hard to get hold of a copy now. Some old paperbacks, if you can track them down and order them, but I wish they'd bring it back in Kindle form, because I download that straight away. And as I say, the background to these, he presents the case and he does the backgrounds to the case, and what led up to it and the setting and all this sort of stuff. It's really gripping. Very good book. Yeah, so it's just a little thing about Syd Dernley and Pierpoint and the British capital punishment in general there.